Hello everyone, and welcome to today's talk, Have a Better Resume Than the Other Candidate. For all the money we spend on university degrees, the resume, and of course its LinkedIn counterpart, remains the most important vehicle to account how potential employers and recruiters perceive you. You will learn resume techniques based on information theory and interdisciplinary epistemology. In this talk, we will represent your resume and each individual bullet as boundary objects using pedagogy within one discipline within the context of another. Now, your resume is a self-promotional marketing tool that is underutilized when candidates treat it as a summary of their experience instead of documentation of how they really added financial value to the firm. In fact, many resumes I see is simply a reiteration of their job description. This is a mistake. So our agenda today is how to align resume formats against how recruiters scan resume. This is based on cognitive neurobiology. Second, learn techniques to improve the clarity of each resume bullet. Third, link resume bullets to organizational metrics and financial outcomes. Fourth, use information theory to increase the gravitas of the words you choose. And if we have time, we'll have a Q&A with the speaker. Now again, today's agenda, let's first talk about how to align the resume format with how recruiters scan resume and also techniques to improve the clarity of each bullet. Now, today's talk is going to cover three areas of how to view a resume. Now, I'm going to give you a lot of information on information theory. Now, information theory is important because the resume is the epitome of information transfer. Now, while I'll be going into detail information theory, when I do resumes for my clients, of course, I spare them all the details of this topic. But the point of today's talk is to give you the tools, so instead of spending money on having a professional resume writer do your resume, you can do it yourself. And you will be the judge if the information we give you today even exceeds those that are available in the marketplace. So we will view your resume the same way a real estate broker looks at a neighborhood, and then we will look at each resume bullet, learning lessons from how Hollywood views the way it markets its own movies against their movie posters. Now, information theory is a mathematical study of the coding of information. Information simply is the reduction of cognitive uncertainty, and that's what we want your resume to be, a reduction of cognitive uncertainty. Did I hire the wrong candidate? Now, people experience uncertainty in all interpersonal exchanges. Uncertainty is an adverse condition and it does generate cognitive stress. Now, think of these points within the context of your interview. Recruiters and candidates both meet to reduce uncertainty and to increase predictability. The predictability that this candidate cannot do the job, therefore they shall not pass, or to increase the predictability that this candidate can do the job and they will move to the next level. Now, interpersonal communication is a developmental process that occurs in stages. Think of the resume as the tool used in one of the earlier stages of this process. So we are talking about proactive uncertainty reduction, making predictions of the most likely alternative actions that the other person might take. So look at the resume as strategic communication, which is planning prior to the interaction. The resume is how the interviewer is going to perceive you even before they meet. Now look at the sentence, the sky was very clear and very blue. Look at the second sentence, the sky was azure. Look at how much we were able to reduce visual clutter by 50% simply by using a more accurate word. We reduced the words from 8 to 4 and visual clutter went down from 37 characters to 18. Now look at the sentence, Jordan is extremely beautiful, Jordan is gorgeous. Again, we reduced the words 25%, but we reduced visual clutter from 40%. This is a very simplistic illustration of a concept called information density, which many resume writers do not always incorporate. Now, there are two ways to get from point A and point B. This is a very legitimate way, but if you notice, with all of the curves, you have to go slower. But we want your resume to be analogous to this, straight ahead. So we want to use information density from information theory, reduce visual clutter to get from point A and point B in less time. Now, I'm using today's talk based on object lessons from the elements of information theory, and this is something you can look up on your own. Now, language is designed to be informationally optimal. Shorter words convey less information than their longer counterparts. Now, there's something called a ZIF law, and ZIF shows that word length and frequency are inversely correlated. Now, when I train career centers in various universities, I do go into the mathematical algorithm of Zipf's law, which you can see on the screen, but this is beyond the scope of today's talk. Now, shorter words, according to Zipf, are used more frequently. Why? Well, to maximize efficiency, as shorter words take less effort to produce or even to search for cognitively when speaking. But here's the rub. While it is more efficient for the speaker to use short words, it takes more effort to decipher from the person receiving the information. So information conveyed by a word can also be quantified by its surprisal value, which is the measure of unpredictability. Words that are predictable from context convey no bits of information and actually constitute noise. For instance, the phrase to be or not to be, the final B is entirely predictable from context, so the surprisal value approaches zero. Words that are highly unpredictable from context have a surprisal value approaching infinity, as the probability of the word given as context approaches zero. Now, of course, when we have something with a very high surprisal factor, it has to make sense, but it always has a bigger emotional impact, and so it is conveying more information. These very basic elements of information theory is at the heart of a resume, but many resume developers fail to take these concepts into account. And this is just a very straightforward graph of Zipf's law. As you can see, if you were to take Hamlet by William Shakespeare, the word the is used the most frequently, and the word of is used half as frequently, and then so on and so on. And this is another illustration of the frequency plot of Zipf's law. So of course, we want to use words that are easy to decipher, but of course take more effort on our part to put together. We want to front load all the work into the resume to make it easier for the information to be received. Now, word length is a function of information context. So many shorter words are easier for the resume writer, but fewer more sophisticated words makes it easy for the reader. They know exactly what you mean. Now, information density can be manipulated by factors outside of lexical content via syntactical variation. You could use the present participle, phonetic reduction, lengthening, contraction of phrases. So there is a correlation between information content and word length. So if we were to look at a common graph in any information theory textbook, let's see how we would superimpose these ideas on your resume. Now, you are the information source. Now, the noise, right, which really increases uncertainty, that would be your competition, other people interviewing for the same job, and even the recruiter's distractions. No one cares as much about us as ourselves. So when recruiters are reading our resume, they're not always doing it with the same care as we would expect them to, or how we would look at our own resume. The receiver of the information is the hiring manager, and the hiring decision is the destination. So I basically took a very basic illustration from information theory, and the tools I'm about to present to you superimpose resume concepts on top of information theory concepts. Now, why information density gets you more of where you want to be? Well, if you look at the phrase, the quick brown fox over the lazy dog, if you look at any of the cognitive neurobiology studies of the last decade, it will show that after a certain portion of the sentence, the reader goes from reading mode to scanning mode, especially if the surprisal value of the word approaches zero. They're not even reading perhaps the last third of the sentence. They go into scanning mode. So information density pushes more of the information at the beginning of the sentence, or optimally makes the sentence so short but yet increases the amount of information that you need to convey that the reader of your resume never gets the scanning mode. Now, of course, they're not doing this consciously. We're talking about subconscious processes that have been proven by neuroscience. So information density is the compactness of an interface in terms of the amount of information, and density metrics is calculated as the quantity of information divided by how much space you needed to convey that information. The smaller the word, the harder it is to define. Now, most people assume that long words or rare words are the hardest to define because they're often the hardest to spell and even remember, but it is the opposite. The truth is, the longer words are usually a snap to understand. Schadenfreude may be difficult to spell, but it's essential to define because all of the uses of it are very, very clear. So Zipf's law says smaller words are more commonly used but difficult to define. So let's look at an extreme example. Words like but, as, for, go, do, take have plenty of uses that are syntactically similar but not identical. Let's do dinner, let's do laundry are identical in syntax but feature different semantic meanings of the word do. So if you look at the graph at the bottom of the slide with information density, we increase information density as we go to rarer and more complex words, and as an added bonus, they also increase the surprisal value, which means that the reader is more engaged. Now again, all of these processes is going on subconsciously as the reader of the resume may not be cognitively aware of all of the processes in terms of his or her own neurobiology when they're reading a resume. So that's what information density is, and that's how we begin to develop tools for your resume based on those theories. Now, what do we use paradigms? We want to look at an issue from an entirely new perspective. So nimble people see parallel and connections, but other people just see differences. So I'm going to explain why am I looking at your resume the same way a real estate broker looks at a neighborhood, and why am I looking at your bullets the same way Hollywood markets their movie. Well, because this is where all great ideas come from drawing parallels outside of another discipline. So the Wright brothers did not view a flying machine as analogous to a bird the same way everyone else did. The Wright brothers basically were bicycle repair people. And is an airplane analogous to a bird or a bicycle? Well, they said it was a bicycle. Why? Well, both a bicycle and an airplane are unstable vehicles requiring nuanced balance and three-dimensional control. And so simply by looking at a new analogy, they solved flight better than anyone who made flight analogous to a bird. It just turned out that the flapping of wings was superfluous to the intrinsic aerodynamics of flight that was better illustrated in a bicycle. So that is the power of the Wright analogy. So here for your resume, what is the parallel between a professional resume writer such as myself and a real estate broker? Well, a recruiter spends on average 6 seconds per resume before segmenting it into the trash bin, okay? An average of 6 seconds. So if we were to look at the SAT analogy, for sale is to job search, as sold is to hire. How do real estate brokers sell a home? And then the next parallel we look at is how does Hollywood market their movies? What is the parallel between each individual resume bullet and the casting of a movie? Now here we see 3 actors. We see Joel, Brian, and Bill. Now one is a leading actor, the other 2 are character actors. And if you're like most people, you only recognize Bill Murray. Joel Murray and Brian Murray, accomplished actors in their own right, you may not even be aware that they are also Murrays. So producers market the movie against their leading actor, and leading actors once signed on now attract future investors for the movie. Supporting actors support the movie but never lead the marketing strategy. So when I look at an individual resume bullet based on this paradigm, I come up with more ideas as well. Now, many resumes I've seen will create the resume from a job description. I believe this is wrong. This approach does not include the very information that your potential employer seeks. Merely saying what you did off your job description does not say if you even did it well, and even if you did it well, it does not even describe if it were of any great benefit to your company. And yet, this is the majority of resumes that I see. Now, why are jobs created in the first place? Well, the fact that the executives of a company created a job, there's an implicit mathematical assumption that the salary for that job must produce results greater than that salary. Profit equals revenue minus cost. So if you're getting paid $50,000 for a job, you must provide value that exceeds $50,000. So the fact that that is the goal is beyond dispute, because no owner of a company would create a job that has a contractual loss for the company. But many people are negligent in even describing what that relationship is. Or another way to look at a resume bullet is, if your boss were to take credit for the task, how would he or she describe the bullet? Now, it's very appropriate for a boss to take both credit and the blame for when a subordinate fails, but they might not describe the activity in the same way. So by looking at what is the benefit for the company, or how would my boss describe this activity to his or her boss, or how can I demonstrate how what I did actually exceeded what HR paid me, this elevates the bullet. And you can always ask, why did my company pay me to perform this task? And then we go back to the overall paradigm. Your resume is your neighborhood. Now, I see your resume as if I were a real estate broker viewing it as a neighborhood. Some parts of the neighborhood are more expensive than others. The most expensive part of your resume is the top to bottom, and also left to right, because as we get to the right end of each bullet, many recruiters now switch to scanning mode, whether or not they realize it. So the least expensive part of the bullet is left to right. The most expensive is at the top. Now, recruiters search resumes to exclude them, deciding to work with the ones that survive. Now, most people think that a recruiter looks for resumes as a reason to include. No. They might get 8,000 resumes from Indeed. They'll print out the first couple of hundred, and they'll go through them quickly, and they're looking for reasons to exclude them so they could work with the pile that remains. So this is done because many HR compensation plans incentivize recruiters hiring good enough and not the best. Well, let's back that up. There are two types of HR comp plans for recruiters. Now, the majority that I've seen in American companies incentivizes recruiters to hire good enough. For example, they're measured on metrics, how many vacancies were filled, or how many open vacancies still exist after 30 days. That's bad. What is your time to hire? So many HR comp plans have recruiters focusing on present metrics. But when I write comp plans for recruiters, I incentivize them to hire the best. So metrics that I measure my recruiters on is, if you hired someone that received a high performance review a year later, you get a bonus. Let's say you hired someone that 5 to 10 years later now rose up through the ranks to an executive level position, you get a bonus. Anytime someone gets hired internally, well, of course, that reduces our SG&A costs because it reduces our search costs. That recruiter also gets a bonus. I do not care if they are already working for another company. I will look up their contact information on my alumni database. They are incentivized to hire the best because the bonuses are tied to the long-term performance of their candidates even after they vacate their current job. But as long as the majority of HR comp plans incentivize recruiters to hire good enough, you have to work within those rules of engagement if you want to get their attention. Now, why do most HR comp plans not incentivize recruiters to hire the very best? Well, I'm not sure. It could possibly be a lack of business awareness or groupthink, but that's how it's done for most companies. But if you agree with me that it's better to incentivize to hire the best, then consider the model that I have just put forth. Also, when I look at your resume, I'm looking at a ratio. I'm looking at the information you want to convey, and I literally divide it by the number of characters, spaces, and words on your resume that I needed to convey it. So for your resume, we want this ratio to be as high as possible and always greater than 1. So often I'll look at a client's bullet, I will double the amount of information I'm conveying, and I will shorten the length of the bullet by usually at least 50%. Now, we want the highest content to word ratio as possible. Less units in a building, the more expensive each unit is via the real estate theory of scarcity. And we also want to avoid the idea of quantitative easing of words. Quantitative easing is when governments print money, it causes inflation. Many resumes inadvertently are inflated. They're using more words that does not increase information or content. Now, the way Hollywood movies are pitched, at the first meeting, the person pitching the movie will say, picture the one sheet. The way movies are pitched in Hollywood is that they describe what the movie poster will look like. Why? Because it's show business, right? It is a business. And when I look at the way Hollywood pitches movies and they say picture the one sheet, they always make sure that the movie is marketed on their main star, on the most expensive real estate of the movie poster. So in this movie, Meryl Streep was paid more than her other two co-stars, and so she occupies the most expensive real estate on a movie poster, which is the center. For your resume, the most expensive real estate is not the center, but in the top. In this movie, Bill Murray occupies the most expensive real estate of the movie poster, and his co-star, which was paid less, which did not drive further investment in the movie, occupies a part of the movie poster that's considered less expensive real estate. So again, your resume, we have to put the most important, informationally dense content at its most expensive real estate, which is the top, and for each bullet, the left side of the bullet. And all bullets are better prepared when they are no more than one line. Now, I also look at the way stories are crafted by movie writers. So you have exposition, rising tension, climax, and then a resolution. So I flip this. When I do resume bullets for my clients, I literally flip it with the reversal of storytelling structure. I start with resolution, then I add tension, then I add exposition, and hopefully I never go more than one line. So resolution, tension, exposition, that means that the bullet starts off with your Bill Murray, the leading star of your bullet. What is the result? Why did your company pay you to do this? Then tension is analogous to what was the issue, right? That might be your Joe Murray, an important supporting part of the bullet. And the exposition might be a little bit of detail for context if there's room. So again, you have to start with the star of the bullet, your leading actor, and that would be, what was the result of what I did? Why did it matter? And I just look at the STAR method that many recruiters train the candidates on: situation, task, action, result. I love the STAR method as long as you allow me to flip it on you and reverse the order for your resume bullets. So your resume bullet will start in the exact opposite of the STAR method. What was the result that your action produced? And then what was the action? And then where did you do the action? Now we'll give some illustrations, but I want you to consider flipping the way the STAR method is used to coach candidates and reverse it for your bullets. So let's use an example. One resume bullet might say, consolidated 9 disparate databases across multiple legacy systems. It's a legitimate resume bullet. I just don't like it. This bullet does not even say if I did it well, and even if I performed the task well, I'm not even articulating what the benefit was to the firm. So I'm going to take this bullet and flush it through the new methodology that I taught you, and I'm going to change consolidated 9 databases across multiple legacy systems, which is missing Bill Murray, and I'm going to change it to increase time to market to executive decision making by consolidating 9 disparate databases into a single instant, on time, on budget. So I've included my Bill Murray, meaning why did the company want me to do it? What was the benefit to the company? Well, to speed up the decision making of its executives. Then I said, how did I do it? By consolidating the databases, and then I added a little context. The level of performance is included in my new and improved bullet, and the benefit to the firm is also included. So let's look at this bullet. Manage and direct the day-to-day functionality of inbound customer service department for e-commerce multiple website business. This is a real bullet off of a real resume. Now the recruiter does not even know if you did the task well, and even if you did the task well, your recruiter does not even know if it mattered all that much. So I'm telling you that all bullets should have your Bill Murray, the result, followed by the benefit, followed by context. This bullet is missing the result and missing the benefit, and only provides context. So let's change that to this bullet. Increase first inbound call resolution by 35% and increase quality assurance levels while reducing average call time through improved candidate screening and newly developed orientation training. I got the result, I got the benefit, I got the context, and I even have it in the proper order. So I'm grabbing the reader when he or she is reading the bullet, and if the recruiter turns to a scanning mode, which inevitably happens towards the end of the bullet, well, I'm providing the least important information towards the end of the bullet. So we start off with the quantifiable result and how it benefited the firm, and then we even added a bit of context. The bullet brags that you did it well, and it brags how it benefited the firm. Here's another bullet. Work with brass ring and compliance coordinators to credential and update candidate records using a certain compliance method. Well, this bullet, it's leading with too much specificity, so it's another chance for the recruiter to exclude you. If the recruiter is not working, or if the recruiter's client is not working with that specific software, well, you're excluded. Every boss emotionally identifies with financial results and company benefits. So even if the context differed, as long as you're leading with the result and the benefit, you've now created an empathy curve between you and the hiring manager. So when using powerful words, do not follow with weaker words that cascade down the same hierarchy. So for example, credentialing is a much more powerful word than updating, so you don't really need updating. So again, this bullet is so specific, you've given the recruiter a chance to exclude you. The exception to that would be if the recruiter actually used this particular software. In that case, it's even more of a match. But for the most part, you're excluding yourself. Now remember, when the recruiter is reading your resume, his or her conscious mind is like a post-it note, but his or her subconscious mind, that's the supercomputer. And we really want to travel as low as possible in the brainstem of the recruiter to make sure that they see how we might be a great fit for the job they're trying to source. Now with resume bullets, we want concise language, right? That increases information density. But we also want words to evoke a visceral positive image. And categories should be hierarchically consistent. So here's another real bullet that I might not like all that much. Partnered with executives in Europe, US, Canada, South America on transformational activities. Well, when I worked with this client, I said, look, it's too vague. What do you mean by partner? What was the interaction? And transformational, okay, it sounds great, but you're not really mentioning if it were a benefit beyond the buzzword of transformational. And then the hierarchy doesn't match. We have a mixture of countries and continents. If you're going to mention a continent, you probably don't need to mention the subcategories of individual countries. Now you could be concise with more words and two-worded with less words. So it's not just about using less words, it's about using less words while saying more. And this bullet had no strong visceral imagery. So there is a tension between vague and specificity. If you're too vague, employers don't see a link. If you're too specific, you've given the recruiter another excuse to scan that resume in 6 seconds and to exclude you. So the employer wants to see an overlap between your resume and their job description. So we want the recruiter to imagine you in the job. So listing specific proprietary systems that many of my clients have done, or too much specificity, can be a reason to exclude and not shortlist the candidate. But what do all employees want? What is not so specific, but yet not so vague that it still registers viscerally with the hiring manager? Well, all employees want increasing revenue, decreasing cost, increased efficiency, reduced cycle time. These are all great benefits that should be the Bill Murray at the top left portion of your bullet, and then you explain how you did it with a little bit of context, because no matter what business you're trying to interview with, regardless, it needs revenue, decrease SG&A costs, reduce cycle time, more efficiency, so you are creating an empathy curve without being too specific. Now another example, a real bullet, was use the Acme, I hid the real name of the payroll system, use the Acme payroll system to handle on and off cycle payments, research discrepancies with pay, assist employees in timesheet approvals, direct deposit, enrollment. I'm not even going to finish this bullet because It's too wordy, it's clumsy, and it even lacks structure. Now, all companies have a payroll system, but they probably don't have that specific payroll system. So unless you know in advance that they're using the same payroll system that you use, here you're too specific and you will be excluded. And this bullet does not claim if the task was even completed on time or even completed successfully or even completed above average. And of course, the bullet has a very low empathy curve. There's no Bill Murray, there's no Joe Murray. So let's change the bullet to this. Reduce payroll cycle time by 30% and increase accuracy by 15% by migrating from a legacy to an off-the-shelf solution. Now, I got to this bullet with my client after interviewing her and really trying to figure out what did she really do on the job. Here we have a result, we have two benefits, and we have context. And it also has a high empathy curve because every company wants to reduce cycle time regardless of the system. A bullet is a talking point for an interview and not inclusive of every detail. It is not a deep dive. So I even left out some context that was in the original bullet because we just want to introduce the bullet as a talking point so we're asked a question about it. Now, every company needs to increase payroll efficiency, so again we have the empathy curve. And the remainder of the bullet adversely does create word inflation. So if we're too specific, we distort the clear narrative line. So that's why I even left out some facts that were in the original bullet. And if you feel that it's information that is important, then it's better to create a second bullet where that bullet will have its own Bill and Joel Murray. Now that's it for now, but stay tuned for we're going to mention some additional techniques beyond the scope of this talk. Now, there's also a type of resume that I work on for my clients that is more suitable for people in marketing or high-tech jobs or millennials in digital advertising or anyone simply willing to stand out from the crowd. Here I use advanced infographic techniques for the resume. And then secondly, we'll discuss a slightly more conservative approach, the hybrid resume, which contains the best of a functional and traditional chronological resume. So let's talk about the advanced infographic resume. Now, this type of resume is less conservative and absolutely is outside of the bell curve. I've had many clients that use this resume not instead of a more traditional resume, but to complement that resume or to at least post in LinkedIn or send out as an initial teaser to get the recruiter's attention. It is more visually accessible to a changing demographic. So just some examples of this type of resume. And again, my goal here is to empower you so you can do these things yourselves and you don't have to necessarily come through me. There's plenty of free and premium software to assist you in creating an infographic resume. This is an example of one. This was for an expat, and this expat wanted to highlight all of the countries that they worked in. So consequently, they mentioned job responsibilities on a map. Here we have a type of resume that illustrates the different categories, the different skills, the level of education along a timeline, and even the history of different jobs along an infographic. Here's another example of a resume that really focuses on graphics. Here we're looking at the person's chronological timeline with the different jobs based on a graph from the year 2003 onward. And it also contains a illustration of the different countries that this candidate worked in. And it contains the different core competencies based on a variation of the pie chart, with 50% of the core competencies are strengths beyond graphic design and 15% on another type of core competency. And again, here's another one where this candidate is looking at, here are the different things that they did, here are the different functions that they had from the year 2001 until 2008, and of course they have the core competencies listed as a different variants of blue shading beneath the timeline. So again, these are absolutely not traditional approaches, but as I've taken on a younger and younger clientele, millennials, they are demanding this type of resume. And here's another one that has the core competencies of the person looking for work, and the size of each circle relates to how strong they are in that core competency. So this particular person has more core competencies in recruiting than perhaps they have in employee relations, as you can see from the way the circles are scaled. This infographic talks about the chronology of the person's skill sets and jobs through a timeline. And here's another one, and you get the idea. Now, another approach that I'm not going to go into detail, this is a separate talk, but you could take the best of a hybrid resume and a chronological resume. So here we've taken the first third of the first sheet of your resume and we've created an executive summary. We start with the branding statement, which is a 3 or 4 line elevator pitch. It's a narrative line. Then that's followed by 9 core competencies in a grid. And then your selected accomplishments are no more than 1 bullet. It occupies the 5 best things that you've done. Now, if the best stuff that you've done is on your current job, you may not need selected accomplishments because your best stuff is already towards the top of your resume. But for many people, the best things that they've done are spread out through different jobs, and some of those jobs might be located towards the bottom of their resume. So the selected accomplishments is the best of the best, and it will go into more detail when it finds its place in the actual bullet under the job. So selected accomplishments will not say specifically where you did it or how you did it, but will emphasize the result, the benefit, with a little bit of context. And then below this part, you cut and paste your traditional resume. So this is a hybrid approach. Now, your non sequitur of the day. There is a direct connection between what you do now and your best possible future. So I caution all of us that a regression to the mean resume can sometimes lead to a regression to the mean result. If you'd like to learn more, reach out to me at hravg.com or reach out to me through LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. That was most informative, and we are going to be taking a few questions. So feel free to jump in and ask questions for Vincent. I just want to let everyone know that we are going to be launching a quick poll to find out how many people might be interested in taking additional training. So just please take the time to fill out our poll before you sign off today. In addition, we have a lot more formative webinars coming up, so you can go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register. And don't forget our social media pages to get the latest technology updates. You can refer to the GoToWebinar chat window for those links on our Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google Plus pages. Okay, Vincent, let's get to those questions. First one is from Sunil. She would like to know, if we do add result, benefit, context in every bullet, how can we limit each bullet to 1 line?
Well, I do it all the time. It really comes down to some of the ideas we talked about in information density. Increase revenue by 30%, that's only going to take so much. So think of it as the wow followed by the how. Now, if you were to give me a very specific bullet, I can easily do it. But in terms of saying how to do it without a specific example, that might be difficult. But all of the resume bullets that I put together for my clients never exceed 1 line, with the exception, if I have to go more than 1 line, that is the last bullet under the job. That way there's a nice symmetry. So the way to do that is really by increasing information density. That's it, and it's easily done. And if you follow the techniques I described with some trial and error, I'm sure you'll be able to come to it. Just reiterative editing process. You should be able to get there as I have.
Great. Next question is from Matthew. He wants to know, is it important to have previous job dates accurate down to the month or the day?
It is very important to be truthful. So if you have worked for a job that, let's say, over 10 years, I believe the actual month might be less important. If you've worked for a job for maybe a year and a half, then the months could be more important, because not including the months might give the illusion that you've worked at that job for 2 years. So I do think that we want to be truthful, but the longer you have worked on a job, the less information you will be conveying by adding the month. But to use the other extreme, if you were only working at an internship for 4 months, now the months become very important. So the answer to your question resides in how long were you at the job. The longer you were at the job, the less pertinent the month is. The shorter time you were at a job, the more important recording the month is.
Okay. Jadish would like to know how long should the resume be? Most people always say 1 page, so he wants you to address that.
Sure. I always wonder when people say 1 page, especially millennials, what do they mean by that? Most resumes are uploaded through Taleo, they're scrolled on an iPad, they're viewed as on a computer screen. So the days of actually printing out a resume and having it be 1 page or exceeding 1 page, I believe that time has passed. So anyone who says that a resume should not be longer than 1 page, I challenge the notion, what does 1 page even mean anymore? Now, as I said before, you could be very wordy with a 1-page resume, and you could be very concise with a 2-page resume. I want to remind you of the ratio of what information you want to convey as the numerator, and the denominator is how many words did it take to say it. As long as that ratio is high, you have achieved information density, and that is more important. Now, I've never seen a case where an employer loved a candidate. They were thrilled about the candidate, but then when they notice, oh no, the candidate went to a 2nd page, now we can't hire her. That's never been the case. If you don't grab their attention on the 1st page, they are not going to look at the 2nd page. But think about it. Would you ever see a candidate that you instantly fell in love with only to tell your boss that you had to reject the candidate because they went over a 2nd page? Of course not. So I'd like you to focus not on how many pages, but on information density.
Okay, Sherry has 2 parts. How do you speak to a restructuring that resulted in a drop in rank? Do you say you lost your direct report, or do you not do that? And she also adds that no one has ever accused people of using this approach or using words that are too fancy for the reader.
Okay, let me focus on the top part of the question. I believe in telling the truth. Only a confident person would tell the truth. If people are laid off, say you got laid off. If people were fired, explain the circumstances. I feel that confident people realize that sometimes bad things even happen to good qualified people. And the way I would handle a restructuring is during the interview, simply tell the truth. Now, that does not mean that at the very beginning of the interview you unload and say every negative thing that happened to you, but when asked the question, be forthright. I think today, especially with the new economy, people understand that's more and more normal. So again, how do you handle a restructuring? By being honest when asked. Now, I believe the second question was, has anyone been accused of using too fancy words? Well, when you say too fancy words, I'm really talking about using the correct word. So for me, it's not a degree of fanciness. It's just that, you know, we're all educated people and we want to use the right word. So if you could use 1 word instead of 3 words, it doesn't make the word fancier. It just makes it more correct, accurate word. And no one should ever be embarrassed of their intelligence or feel ashamed and feel that they need to dumb it down. So do not use fancy words for the sake of using fancy words, but if you could use 1 word instead of 3, that's simply you respecting the reader's time, and it's you being more accurate.
Okay, Nick would like to know, how do you hide your age on your resume if possible? And then he adds, they can always find your age on the internet though. I'm in my late 50s.
Well, you're right that they could always find your age on the internet, but one way not to emphasize your age is that people no longer have to put the date that they graduated from college and high school. Some of the courts have ruled that that could lead to de facto, not de jure, but de facto age discrimination. So you have resumes because of that ruling that simply do not include the year that you graduated, because that could infer an age, and age is not a bona fide occupational requirement, and so people do not have to convey information that is not a bona fide occupational requirement, either directly or indirectly. So one technique people do is to simply leave out the date that they graduated from some life event that would indicate their age, such as an undergraduate degree. But I also want to invite you to consider leaning into it. I mean, age comes with experience and different values that you could add. Often I've had people hire other people specifically because of their age. The slang term within recruitment circles is called adult supervision, which means that you have a genius CEO, and I mean that quite literally, not facetiously. You have a genius CEO, 28 years old, is going to change the world, but he or she simply does not understand enough about cash flow, so when they get an eviction notice, right, it puts the investor's money in jeopardy. So there is a trend where recruiters are specifically looking to hire people with more years of experience, specifically to mine the business portion of a startup company. So instead of even psychologically wanting to hide your age, and I do understand the inclination to do that, but I'm just inviting you to consider, just own it, because I think what comes through is confidence. And someone that's very confident about themselves, including their age, I think that's going to ring a much louder bell than the actual age. And then you want to even emphasize the experience that comes to that increased age, and how that could go back to the resume, but how that could lead to a better result with a better benefit for the company.
Eric would like to know, should I include all my experience or just stick to, say, the last 10 years?
Well, I do want to say that the answer is always going to be subjective, because there is not a binary answer to that. So I always encourage my clients to go with their inner gut, even if that contradicts something that they believe that I told them, because your instincts are much more powerful than anything that I could tell you. But I've heard people carry as much as 20 years and seldom beyond 20 years. If you only want to do 10 years, if you're an older person, maybe you want to do more than 10 years, but it doesn't mean that you have to include every detail. So for example, if you're going to include 20 years, it might be the last 10 years with specific bullets of experience, and then for the 10 years before that, perhaps you just list the company, your title, and the years of employment without resume bullets. So that might be a compromise. So in conclusion, I've seen many people make the cutoff at 20 years, sometimes 15, but generally I don't see 10 years as a cutoff, but think of a hybrid approach where you simply do not provide all of the specific bullet details for the jobs that you occupied at the very beginning of your career.
Okay. Amar would like to know if you could elaborate on achievements. He is a civil engineer and a PMP, but most of the work he has done has been as a team member and merely following the scope of the work and executed the designs.
Well, the challenge of answering questions like this is that normally if you were a client, I would drill down and ask you more questions to really give you a definitive answer. But I'm always up for a challenge. Even though you're part of a team, that means you are still part of an achievement, a result, and a benefit. It doesn't mean that you didn't have a role in that. You absolutely did have a role in that. Your resume will not say led the team. Your resume bullet will say that you were on the team. And then within the team, you don't have two people that have identical function. You don't have two people that have redundant functions. Even two people within the same team, each one had a different responsibility. So that individual responsibility is your own individual bullet on how you add it to the team. And then, as I mentioned at the top of my answer, you could also talk about the result and benefit as part of the team. So in conclusion, list the achievement as the team, saying that you were a team member, And then within that team, what was your unique competitive advantage? Why were you on that team? And what did you do solely on that team that was your responsibility? And that becomes your own individual bullet.
Okay, Allison would like to know, are there any limitations to using the infographic resume if it was submitted to a large company that uploads resumes to HRIS systems, or better suited for a startup, etc.?
Well, there are so many HRIS systems. I certainly could not speak to every HRIS system in existence, but the infographic resume at its heart is a PDF file. So as long as a system allowed an attachment and it allowed a PDF file, I don't see restrictions. In terms of restrictions and culture and whatnot, well, the worst that would happen is that you might not get the job. So a resume, remember the top of our talk, I said is a self-promotional marketing tool. That means you get to do whatever you think is best. It doesn't mean that you're always going to pick the exact format that resonates with every employer, but look at your downside. Your downside is perhaps it didn't resonate and you didn't get the interview. But going back to the top of my answer, in terms of a technology limitation, as long as the system accepts an attachment with a PDF file, you should be fine. If it's asking you to re-enter the information individually in buckets, well, then of course the infographic resume would be limited.
Okay, I have been looking for a job for a year and I've only had 2 interviews. Could it be my resume?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, do not be discouraged. It only takes one. Now, could it be your resume? It most certainly could be your resume, but it could be many other things as well. Now, I always tell my clients that by the time you have to look for a job, you lose some of your leverage. The best time to look for a job is when you have a job, because then you're not looking for a job, you're looking for professional relationships which can be leveraged for a job. So even though you're currently looking for a job now, you might want to consider the approach, instead of looking for a job, look for interesting, meaningful professional relationships. Networking is about what can I do for you. So just by asking to meet with people, and you could even say, I just want to pick your brains about the industry. And then at the end of that information interview, you say, could you recommend another person I could speak to, right? And now you get the domino effect. And of course, the last question in an information interview is, now what can I do for you? So think about focusing on professional relationships instead of just looking at a job. I also take clients to career fairs, and I specifically have them go without their resume, and I have them ask the same questions that an investor would ask, because now they're talking about the business instead of about what they need. And in that regard, that unequal power of distribution between the company and the job seeker is more evened out. So I would need more details on your situation to give a definitive answer, but it could be your resume, but it could be a number of things. But please don't get discouraged and hang in there.
Okay, next question is from Sam, who says he has been unemployed for several months now, but in that time he has been completing projects to showcase that he has learned new technical skills. He's heard that your resume should be chronological, but my work experience is more significant than the projects. Which would you recommend I put first, the projects or the work experience?
Well, if you've done these projects while you were out of work, chronologically, I believe that would be the most recent, so I think that would go on top right away. I would include that as a job, and you could call your job title contractor, add these projects, and really what you did was a great idea. So I would make that a job. Call it contractor with the date that you lost your previous job to the present. And yeah, it is a job. Just because you worked for yourself doesn't make it any less of a job. So put it on top, and your title is contractor.
Okay, Giselle would like to know, should we include a brief description of the employer history?
Of the employer history, without having more detail about your question, usually resumes are about the history of the candidate, not about the company. Recruiters should have a general knowledge of the industry and companies in general, and with the commoditization of knowledge, it just requires a search on the internet if they want more information. but as a personal opinion, without having more detail, I would not waste valuable real estate promoting the company. I would use it in promoting myself.
Should every bullet have the result benefit content, or perhaps just the first bullet out of, say, 3 of them?
I firmly believe the more bullets that say how you added value to the firm, the more you've conveyed that you've added value to the firm. When you see a bullet that doesn't describe how you added to the firm, the recruiter's not thinking that you added tremendous value, but you simply held back out of humility. The assumption is that either you did not, or you may have, but you're not aware. So I believe that every bullet should be as strong as every other bullet.
Okay, I got time for one last question. In another talk, you talked about creating a digital resume. Can you explain what this is?
Sure. A digital resume is a new concept that I've been working on with my recent clients. Many clients have a lot of work where they've done web designs for other projects, other companies. They've written articles. So a digital resume is embedded with hyperlinks. So from a digital resume, when the recruiter wants to see samples of work, they simply click on the link. When I've developed digital resumes for my clients, I've also helped them create their own website, okay, where they were able to upload work samples, and that way that resume becomes all-inclusive of a person's portfolio, which is represented as digital links embedded in the digital resume. And if anyone would like to learn more, you can always reach out to me via LinkedIn. Thank you.